really weird. I'm first off going to introduce my guest at this time. His name is DaMichael Cole, who has come back home to Memphis, and he is now with the Commercial Appeal, beat writer of the Memphis Grizzlies. DaMichael Cole, how are you doing, sir?
Man, I'm doing great, Shawn. It's good to join you. Thanks for having me. Man, I've been doing great. Just getting adjusted to the new beat, and getting into a flow of things. It's been a pretty busy couple weeks since I got here, but it's been fun, man. It's been fun.
Well, while I only will say that I can speak for myself, I do feel confident in saying for others in the first few basic month that you've been here. It's been great to hear your voice. It's been great to get your perspective. So many great stories out there. I know you got a story on Rob Fisher and, his versatility over the past couple of days, and also a wonderful story on the significance of the Bulls and the Grizzlies playing on Dr. Martin Luther King Day and the impact he had on both cities. We'll obviously discuss that in a bit. But DaMichael, I'm wearing a black polo here, and I got a black chair behind me. I think it's because I'm kind of in mourning that we're doing this show after a Grizzlies loss. It's so weird. If I'm correct, this is the first loss the Grizzlies have experienced since you got on the beat covering the team. Is that right?
Yeah. I believe the first game that I did, like, was when I went through the recap and everything, was the Golden State game. But right after that, I mean, they rolled off 11 straight. But it's been kind of crazy, just jumping on the beat and the team just reels off this big streak. And I mean, you knew at some point, especially with the way it happened and everything, that the wheels were eventually going to fall off. But man, it was a pretty wild way to come on the beat. A lot of people were looking at me like a good luck charm or something.
We'll continue to look at it that way because at the end of the day, one loss is one loss. But I'll ask you this question. For those, DaMichael is from Memphis, who has started off his writing career in Philadelphia, and the best decision of his life so far was the fact that he attended the University of Tennessee. But we won't get too much into that. But the point that I will say is that with DaMichael, coming off that loss against Dallas, obviously the wheels fell off is a good way of looking at it. Fatigue settled in, shots would not fall. But I'll just ask in general, are there any concerns beyond that you took from that loss to Dallas that kind of, was a reminder that, as wonderful as things are, still clear areas where this team needs to work?
Well, I think there are areas that they need to work, of course. Even while they were winning, you sometimes winning cures, you overlook mistakes and things like that when a team is winning sometimes. But at the end of the day, I think, you can't take too much from that game, because a tired team, I mean, it's, it's not an excuse in NBA when you talk about a team being tired. It's not really an excuse. It's a legitimate reason as to why a team can lose a game. It causes a lot of short jump shots. It impacts effort on defense just because you don't have the legs, you don't have the energy, and you're playing a team that had a day off, and even though they traveled, it was a short trip. So, I mean, they have fresher legs, and they played like the fresher team over the course of the game. And I think the best indication that there isn't much more to worry about than the fact that the Grizzlies got tired is the first half. They looked like the better team for the most part of the first half. They just wore down. That's what happened when you have a tired team. Eventually those minutes stack up and you don't have much left. So I don't think you can take too much from it. I think even the Mavs players that I talked with after the game, Luka Doncic, I mean, very humble guy, I think, naturally, but still he was very complimentary. I asked him what did he think if, they see the Grizzlies in the playoffs, because that could be a 3-6, 4-5 possible matchup. And he says that would be a tough opponent. We would have to bring it. We would have to be at our best to beat them. He was very complimentary of them, and he was very complimentary of Ja Morant. So I don't think there's too much to take from that game. If there are some traits that develop, then we can, revisit that discussion. But I think it was just, they're tired and they get a couple days off and they're at home, so they don't have to travel throughout those couple days. You can't get any better than that.
You're exactly correct. And I agree with you. At the end of the day, if the shots aren't falling, there's nothing you can do to control that. And fatigue is going to catch up with you. Even for a team that loves to get out on the run, is as young as the Grizzlies, it's going to eventually catch up with you. But a couple of things that are kind of eye-opening is that over this streak, and I'm not sitting here trying to be a negative Nate or anything like that. I'm just sitting here looking at the numbers, is that over this 11-game winning streak, you look at the numbers, the Grizzlies have been towards the bottom of the league in three-point shooting, towards the bottom of the league in free throw shooting. Again, they've overcome it. But especially with Jaren Jackson Jr., if there is a bit of a concern, is that there are going to be games where if Desmond Bane is not on from three, you've got to rely on others to shoot. If it's not John Morant having a great shooting game, then you're kind of stuck in between a rock and a hard place. Jaren shooting, we know it's there. I don't necessarily think it's a concern, but it certainly would be good to get him back going to support Desmond and Ja from distance.
Yeah, Shawn, I mean, I agree with you 100% because the thing about just Jaren Jackson and Jr. and the way he plays is I feel like, when we saw him play the 5 in those games where Steven Adams was out, I believe it was 3 games, and 2 of the 3 games he had really, really good games where he's pushing 20 points and things like that. Once he's at that 5, he's able to go off the dribble more, attack the rim, be a little bit more aggressive, draw fouls, and that leads to better, that leads to rhythm shots. Whereas when he's at the 4, Steven Adams banging in the paint, there's not a lot of driving room because once you drive, that other big man is going to rotate over and, things like that. So he's taking a lot of three-pointers without having a rhythm. And, we saw early in his career how well, he could really, really shoot the ball when he has it going. But right now, I mean, I think, you're kind of training him to be that 5 and it's like you have to play him, you have to play him at the 4. So probably, and that's the thing they have to figure out because later on in the season, we could see them go to a Brandon Clark at the 4, Jaren Jackson at the 5. And I think that would be, better for his offensive skill set than playing alongside Steven Adams. But you talk about things like what has made this team dominant, rebounding. You need Steven Adams in there so it's gives and takes both ways, and it impacts Jaren Jackson Jr. I think more than any other player in the starting lineup.
Good and astute point that you're bringing up about Jaren Jackson Jr. is that when he's at the 5 and he's got that freedom of being able to have the paint not as clogged with a Steven Adams there because you can get Brandon Clark out, he's going to have the ability to take his defender off the dribble to where he's not his overall value is not as reliant on offense on the 3. So that's a very, very good point. But the thing that I'll also say is, and that leads to another fun topic, is Brandon Clark at the 4, Jaren at the 5 starting, or Jaren at the 4, Steven Adams at the 5 starting. For me, I'm perfectly fine with Clark and Jaren Jackson. The numbers are excellent. You want to see that for the future of this team to see how they can do against the other team's best players. But right now, with us struggling from 3, the possession edge that is gained from Jaren and Adams' defense plus Adams' offensive rebounding is hugely important as well. When it comes to that trio, DaMichael, are you on board with seeing what you got with Clark and Jaren starting going forward to see, what that pairing could do against the opponent's best lineups? Or do you still think Steven Adams should have a significant role in that trio as well when it comes to playing starting minutes versus closing minutes, what have you?
Shawn, I think you start Steven Adams. You deal with what comes offensively, the inconsistencies with Jaren Jackson Jr. because he's too talented. Eventually, he's going to have some games where he's really good. He's going to have some games where he's not as good. But you have enough offensive talent in that lineup with Morant and Bane, and eventually, Dylan Brooks will be back. So I think you stick with it, being that Adams is so good at some of those smaller things, and the way he dominates the glass, like you just mentioned, with those extra possessions, that's so important. And at the end of the day, we got to think ahead, right? You gotta look ahead to the playoffs, and in the playoffs, more than likely, you're gonna have to either face Rudy Gobert, who's one of the best rebounders in the NBA, DeAndre Ayton, who's one of the best rebounders in the NBA. The Lakers will have Anthony Davis back, and he's a better rebounder than Jaren Jackson, so they'll have him back. The list goes on, with that top tier group. Jokic, same way. You're gonna need it. You're gonna need Steven Adams. You're gonna need that force, that physicality that he brings. It's funny because just talking to all the coaches, the opposing coaches, and I'd almost be willing to say that opposing coaches have Steven Adams second on the game plan behind Ja Morant, above, because of all the little things that he brings to the table. The rebounding, those extra possessions kill teams. And, the screens he sets for Desmond Bane, who was, outside of the three-point shooting, he's become a really, really, really good cutter. And a lot of that is Steven Adams just setting those brick wall screens. It's the little things. With the Brandon Clark, Jaren Jackson combo, you get a lot more fun. You get them out in transition. You get more alley-oops. You get the high-flying blocks and things like that. But at the end of the day, I think just the winning lineup and the lineup that you want to use in the postseason, you're going to want to have Steven Adams on the court to guard Nikola Jokic or DeAndre Ayton or Rudy Gobert and those type of guys.
I agree completely. At the end of the day, that's what makes this Grizzlies team so good, is that you've got so many players who do the roles that they do, and they do it at a very good rate. We'll get with DaMichael here in just a second, talking about another Grizzly who we're all awaiting coming back. But before we do that, I want to talk with you for a second about Shopify. Shopify gives entrepreneurs the resources once reserved for big business. So upstart startups and established businesses alike can sell everywhere, synchronize online and in-person sales, and effortlessly stay informed. If you go to shopify.com/LockedOnNBA, use it all lowercase for Locked On NBA, you'll get a free 14-day trial and get full access to Shopify's entire suite of features. Grow your business with Shopify today. Go to shopify.com/LockedOnNBA right now. Shopify.com/LockedOnNBA. Very excited because this is the first time I've had the chance to speak with DaMichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal. Evan Barnes has been a wonderful voice covering the Grizzlies. DaMichael Cole is now there right with him. But the thing that makes DaMichael Cole so awesome, besides being a Tennessee Volunteer, is it's a fresh perspective, right? Evan Barnes is wonderful. Everybody who covers the Grizzlies is wonderful. And in his short time here, DaMichael is showing his perspective is wonderful as well. And DaMichael, I'll ask you this question because I know there's a player that I know you follow the Grizzlies for years, but someone that you've not get to see play so far that much due to injury is Dillon Brooks. This team has shown that they're perfectly fine with, out some of their best players for short stretches. But at their best, this team playing top 10 defense is what matters. Dillon Brooks helps us consistently do that. How impactful has his absence been, in your opinion?
Well, I think it's one of those Band-Aid things, and I kind of wrote about this as well, basically saying right now you can survive without him. You have the second weakest schedule in the Western Conference for the remainder of the season. So right now you can go through stretches and say, we have enough good players where we can firmly stay in the top four of the Western Conference without anything crazy happening. So you'll need him to win in the postseason. You're going to need him to guard potentially a Kawhi Leonard who could come back, or a Devin Booker, or a Donovan Mitchell, or any of these guys. Jamal Murray is probably going to come back with Denver sometime soon. You're going to need him to guard those guys. And I wrote in the last win that they had against the Timberwolves, it was the game where I believe Anthony Edwards had 29 and D'Angelo Russell had 28. And they won the game. It was an impressive win. But I said this was the first game where I saw, and I said, this is the game they needed Dillon Brooks. Because if you watch that game in the first half, Anthony Edwards torched them. 25 points in the first half. In the second half, it was D'Angelo Russell keeping him in the game and getting to wherever he wanted to get to on the court. Now, eventually the Grizzlies wore them down, and talent took over, and just they're the better team. But that game wouldn't even have gotten down to those last few possessions if, when Anthony Edwards has 15 points in the first half, you say, Dillon, get him. Or as soon as D'Angelo Russell gets going in the second half, you say, Dillon, switch on to Russell now. And, you didn't have that right now. We've seen periodically, even in the game they won against the Suns, where Devin Booker, scores over 30 points. And in that last shot, Desmond made that critical mistake where he leaves Booker, and Booker, rises up for that three where John Morant bails him out on the other end. But if John misses, we're talking a lot more about Desmond Bane, not being there with Devin Booker on that shot. So it's like the winning, like we said earlier, the winning will mask some of these things. But overall, they haven't, just necessarily missed him, I would say. But you're going to need him. You can't, honestly, it'd be difficult to see them winning a first-round series, in my perspective, without Dillon Brooks. Even though I think, can they? Of course. But they're going to need him. You're going to need him because rotations are going to get shorter. And some of these guys that are playing on these benches right now, when the Grizzlies bring in their depth and Tyus Jones and Brandon Clark and these guys, and they take off, those bench guys are going to be playing 6, 7, 8 minutes. So they're not going to be important. You're going to have to guard Jamal Murray for 40 minutes. You're going to have to guard Kawhi Leonard for 38 minutes probably. You're going to have to guard, Devin Booker for 40 minutes. You're going to need that dog, and he's the guy. So they don't miss him as much right now, but I think, eventually you're going to need him. If you want the Grizzlies to maximize their potential and possibly come out of this Western Conference, you need Dillon Brooks.
You just went through a list of great examples. And, another example of that was this past Friday night when Luka Doncic was cooking in that third quarter. Who is the perfect guy to put on him and also give you that energy? And the other thing, though, that stands out, because you're absolutely right, against those elite guys, Dillon's one of the best in the league at maybe not shutting them down, but at least making them have to work hard and containing them a bit when it comes to the opposition's, highest usage player, best score, what have you. But the other thing that stands out to me, DaMichael, is not only the energy, but in games where a jaw is limited or games where a Desmond is not, hitting his threes, Dillon is a guy that can create his own shot. He's a nice layer to back up those two as a safety net. And so I think his offense certainly stands out as well at times. You could especially see it when Ja was out in December.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, he had the best stretch of his career, right? 5 games in a row with 20 or more points. And when Ja was out, they went 10-2. I mean, he was great. He was getting to his spots. He was making shots all over the floor. And we've seen, Dillon Brooks, the shot creator. And even I would say it hasn't looked particularly pretty with him and Ja in the lineup yet, but we've seen it. We saw the playoffs last season when him and Ja had a really special game against Utah together. So it's like it can happen, and we know, eventually it probably will happen. Right now, they haven't clicked as well, but net rating wise, I mean, that lineup is still, I believe, 6 plus 16 plus 17 points when it's Dillon Brooks, Bane, Ja Morant, Steven Adams, and Jaren Jackson Jr. They're still blasting opponents, even though it's only been about 90 minutes, but it's a very strong lineup. And I think, eventually get him back, get him going offensively with Ja Morant in the lineup, with Desmond Bane in the lineup, so he can play off of those guys, get to his spots while they get to their spots as well. And you got a really special thing cooking up, Shawn.
And the other thing that since we're talking about personnel at the moment, the other thing that I would love to see, obviously, is with Dillon being out and, the starters, not really having their impact over the past few games like they've been having, the bench has had to step up. I find it hard to believe there's a better bench combination right now than Tyus Jones and Brandon Clark that are playing, especially with their scoring. But in terms of advantage, in terms of impact, when he's at his best, it's hard to find a Grizzly other than John Morant, who's as impactful as De'Anthony Melton. But unfortunately, since coming back from being out with health and safety protocols, De'Anthony Melton has struggled. The Grizzlies have been okay, but that's another layer that if we could get him going, that would be awesome. Just from what have you seen, DaMichael, it always seemed like he was going to fall off a bit from the leaps that he took offensively last year. The defense hasn't really fallen off as much, but just overall, you're definitely not getting the advantage that he creates that you've seen earlier this year and last year. You're not getting that same De'Anthony Melton. How does he figure it out to get back to being that best version of himself for the Grizzlies?
Man, Shawn, that's the question, because at the end of the day, when these guys get back, you don't know how COVID impacts them. You just don't, unless we get a chance to ask them. We haven't had a chance to talk with De'Anthony Melton yet since he's returned. But you don't know. Maybe it's impacting him. Maybe it's just he's more of a rhythm guy and he has some rust there, or maybe he's just straight up struggling. He's hitting the wall. But I don't think it's something too concerning. But I think it is. His minutes are starting to get trimmed. Tyus Jones is playing really well. Zaire Williams is really stepping into a nice role, and Zaire is the guy who's mainly cutting into those De'Anthony Melton minutes there, and it's a concern for sure. But I think he'll find himself, because he's a talented player. He's a guy I like. I like just the speed, the pace he plays at. He gets to. He's one of those guys. He doesn't. He's not one of those guys where you say, what type of shot was that? Where you see some guys, they end up just forcing. Every shot he takes, it looks like a De'Anthony Melton shot, and that's you can't say that with a lot of players. I think eventually he'll be fine, but working his way back a little bit slower than I think Grizzly fans may have gotten spoiled when Zaire Williams comes back and has a big game. Jarrett Culver comes out of protocols and have a big game. And, all these guys, we saw even with Steven Adams. Steven Adams had to to get his conditioning back, even when he was out of health and safety protocols for the Timberwolves game, but his conditioning just wasn't there enough for him to play yet. So what you're having right now is maybe he has to work his way back. He's only been playing about 15 minutes or so. So there just may be that, or I mean, he'll find himself if it's something more. I think, like you said, Melton at his best is a legitimate talent player on this team.
And it just reminds you, we're talking about Dillon being out. We're talking about, De'Anthony Melton struggling. We're talking about Jaren struggling. Despite winning, 21 out of 26 games now, we've still not seen the best version of this team. And that's what makes it so exciting. And we're going to talk with DaMichael about that in just a moment. But I want to talk to you a little about, who to bet on. And DaMichael was there, I believe, when Desmond Bane got the fan base excited a bit when it came to saying he's going to be in that three-point competition if he's asked. So when it comes to betting, I would bet on Desmond Bane. But in general, when it comes to you betting, BetOnline.ag, title sponsor of the show, is a great place for you to go. The NFL's going on, playoffs, NHL, basketball, UFC. All you got to do is go to your mobile device or on the laptop, new updated site, put in the promo code Locked On. You'll get a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Check out BetOnline.ag today. Now, I'm not sure what DaMichael enjoys for breakfast, but I'm sure he likes options. But I can tell you this, a versatile option that you could have is Built Bar. Over 18 different flavors to choose from at Built.com. You can also put in the promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off. But like the Grizzlies have so many options that can step up and help them win a game, you can win your day by going to Built Bar and checking it out. When you make it a part of your day, it's going to be there to stay. Go to Built.com, get your favorite flavor, put in that promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your next order from Built Bar. So, DaMichael, we're getting into a fun time of the season, and we talk about the fact that the Grizzlies have not had the real chance to be at their best because they just haven't had their best players on the court that much. We do have a very tough week coming up. Bulls on Monday. Then you've got the Bucks. You've got the Mavericks this week as well. And then you've also got the 76ers and the Jazz waiting as well. But after that, the schedule gets a bit easier. But DaMichael, I'll ask you this, and I know you'll probably have plenty of details to cover this. That trade deadline is coming up. We've already heard Woj say not a lot is expected from the Grizzlies. I don't think that there should be because there's just not a lot that you need. Let this team ride out and see what you've got. What's DaMichael Cole's version? What does DaMichael Cole feel the Grizzlies should do when it comes to the trade deadline this year?
Yeah, I think people like the flashy moves and things like that, but a lot of times it's those moves where you're just putting on the final little piece of the puzzle that makes it right. And it doesn't take much. I mean, last year with the Bucks, it was getting PJ Tucker, something as small as that. Or, I mean, a lot of times that's all it takes. It doesn't have to be these big fancy moves. And the other team in the finals was the Suns. For them, it was getting a guy like Torrey Craig, who became a big piece for them. So it's a lot of times we overthink it and we say, oh, you go get Jaylen Brown, you go get Bradley Beal, you go get Ben Simmons. And at the end of the day, ego is a thing in the NBA. And I was talking with Brevin Knight actually the other day about this, and we were saying that, the Grizzlies, they don't have that problem. The Grizzlies don't have that ego problem because these are a bunch of guys who are embedded into a culture. And once you bring in a star, you're going to cater to him a little bit. You want to make him feel comfortable being around, and you don't know how everyone's going to accept that and all that. But short answer is, I don't think you have to do much. I think there are moves to be made, but there aren't any moves that are going to excite the fan base. But there are moves to be made. I think you never can have enough 3-and-D wings. I think a guy like Robert Covington makes sense in Portland. You could go hit him. You could play him at the 3. Let's say, I mean, I like Zaire Williams and what he's done, but let's say he hits, a rookie wall or something. You have this vet and Robert Covington, who you'd rather have him guarding, a guy like LeBron than having, Covington. Or, Covington could shoot better from 3 than like a guy like Kyle Anderson or so forth. And he could play the 3, the 4, a guy like that who fits the versatility, who fits the mentality. I think another guy, there are some backup big men out there who I think would make sense. I think you need to get a backup, probably legitimate 7-foot, big bruise, another Steven Adams type player. Because as I just mentioned, I mean, you have to measure yourself up with the top of the Western Conference, right? So you look at the Jazz. They got Rudy Gobert, and when he gets his 2 fouls, Hassan Whiteside is coming right in the game. DeAndre Ayton gets his 2 fouls. JaVale McGee's coming right into the game. DeAndre Jordan gets his 2 fouls. Here comes Dwight Howard. So you measure yourself up against those teams. I think it's those small pieces, man. The Grizzlies don't need to go get Jaylen Brown. Now, if they get Jaylen Brown, now you're talking about, having some legitimate star power to go with Morant, and it'll look fun, but we don't know how it will work because in order to get him, you're probably removing the bench depth. And, sometimes that's good. Sometimes that works out for teams. Sometimes it doesn't. But if I was GM, if I was climbing, I'm going out there, I'd scan the market for some backup bigs for a cheap second round pick maybe, or get a guy like Robert Covington, a good 3-and-D wing, who you can say if Dylan Brooks, gets in foul trouble, or if you want to put him on the court with Dylan Brooks if you're going against a team, one of those teams with 2 elite guards, maybe the Suns. You got Chris Paul, you got Devin Booker in the clutch, and you say, okay, we put Robert Covington on one of these guys and we put, Dylan Brooks on the other. Now you're really cooking. So I think that's the move to make. Just solidify the wing with maybe another 3-and-D guy and get a backup big who can bring that same amount of rebound. And you see when Steven Adams goes out of the game, sometimes the rebounding, it takes a dip. Xavier Tillman's a really good player, not the type of rebounder that Steven Adams is. I think Brandon Clark brings some of that with his energy. But when he plays those bigger guys who are just technically more sound, like a Dwight Howard, JaVale McGee, I think that just presents more problems. So those are the moves to be made. Nothing that the fans will say, oh, wow, about. But, Shawn, we've seen how good they can be over these last 11 games. You don't need to completely overhaul this. This is not, a 6 or 7 seed right now that's looking to jump to where the Grizzlies are. So you don't have to do too much.
And I think that it may still be too early to call him this, but Kleiman, DaMichael, also has really turned into a master of the margins. He hasn't sat here and made these major moves, but he has hit on so many moves in the margins that excites you, that even though it may not be the big flashy move like you're talking about, it still could be a very significant move that can certainly play out. But speaking of significant moves, I think it's a lot of fun. This isn't the first time. I think that the Bulls are our most consistent opponent on Martin Luther King Day for obvious reasons. But this version of the Bulls in this game is a lot of fun. Unfortunately, Zach LaVine is out. It's good to hear that his injury is not anything significant. But DeMar DeRozan, in my opinion, truly is a top 5 MVP candidate. One of the best stories of the year. And this Bulls team is right there in the Eastern Conference, a very strong offensive team that does enough on defense to make it happen. When you look at this matchup tomorrow, even with LaVine not being in the game, DaMichael, what stands out? Because even if you can contain DeMar slightly, there's still plenty of other options on the Bulls that can beat you. That's why they're as good as they are.
Shawn, this is going to be a fun game. Even, like you said, no Zach LaVine, but we have seen the Bulls, the reason they're at the top of the Eastern Conference, because they've had Vucevic, in protocols. They've had Zach LaVine in protocols. They've had Lonzo Ball in protocols, but they have persevered each time. And they're a legitimate contender, I think. But I'm a matchups guy, Shawn. Every game I pick out a single matchup, and it's the one I want to key in on. A lot of times, it's the bigs, and I think Vucevic, Adams will be fun. It's gonna be a lot of cold baths after that one. But the matchup that I want to watch the most would be possibly Lonzo Ball if he plays, and then Ja Morant. You talk about 2 of the more explosive point guards in the NBA, and you talk about Ja Morant going up against a bigger point guard and another talented playmaker. I think that'll be a real fun matchup to watch. And then you want to see how they guard DeMar DeRozan. DeMar DeRozan has the ball in his hands a lot in the pick and roll. Who's going to guard him? We've seen the Grizzlies use Zaire Williams to start out on Steph Curry. So that showed the confidence that they have, in the rookie. Do you go with the length with the rookie? And, you have DeMar DeRozan, who's a real strong guy. Or do you go with the stronger guy in Desmond Bane, but you have DeRozan who can rise over the top of anyone with that mid-range jumper. So you figure out what you want to do there. But overall, I think this is an exciting game. I wrote in my story about MLK Day that these two teams are two of the biggest surprises in the NBA, being that they've done it different ways. And I talked to Brevin Knight about this as well. We talked about how the Grizzlies did it more organically. It's drafting, it's hitting on the margins, like as you pointed out, and things like that. Whereas the Bulls said, okay, we got Kobe White here. Okay, we traded for Zach LaVine. All right, we can't sit here for long. Let's go out and get some of these guys. They go get Vucevic. Then DeMar says he wants to join up, and boom, just like that. So they were more aggressive with their approach. And the only way for that type of team to work is you have to put egos to the side. And we were referencing egos earlier. The Bulls have really put their egos to the side. DeMar is that type of guy. One of the most likable players in the league. He really speaks out openly about mental health, and he's just a really likable guy. But the Grizzlies, it's going to be a fun matchup. But Ja Morant, Lonzo Ball, lock me in for Ja's going to come back really aggressive this game. But Lonzo's a really good defender too. So that's the matchup time.
And then DaMichael, as we're here with DaMichael Cole, one other quick question. DaMichael, your story that you talked about earlier today, you also talked about how when it came to Martin Luther King Jr., obviously the impacts that, obviously on the nation, but Memphis, Chicago in general, it's always special for much more important reasons outside of a basketball game being played. The Grizzlies are going to honor Muggsy Bogues and others, but it's great to have this type of spotlight on Memphis in general. But for the reason honoring as great of a man as Dr. King was, just speak to from your experience, being an NBA fan, but also like you did in your story, just how important should it be to everybody when it comes to the significance of this game itself, but also the man that it's honoring in Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah, man, it's important. And we say, this game is important every year, because it always paints that picture. It highlights, what Dr. King did for us and for these, these types of cities. And that's what I focused on in the story was Memphis and Chicago being, two of the blacker cities in America at that time in terms of population, in terms of being, a lot of the Black people being stuck in, poverty-stricken neighborhoods. Those were two cities where that happened a whole bunch. And I actually wrote in that story. I didn't think a lot of people knew this, but Dr. King referred to Chicago as the most segregated, city in the nation, more so than all of the cities that he routinely visited in the South, including Memphis. So it was really important for me to point out the fact that Dr. King actually, he had an apartment in Chicago. He went up there and stayed. He really, was he had a End the Slums campaign that he was working with some people in Chicago that they were hoping to, put together there. And he encountered some similarities, whereas when he came to Memphis, some political drawback, some media drawback at times, like with the sanitation workers and things like that. And I think it's important when you get Chicago and Memphis together. That's the specific thing we can highlight, because with Dr. King's legacy, we're always going to honor, just the whole wide viewpoint of what he did. But you have to find those little intricacies, those little details of what he did, particularly for these cities, what he did for Memphis, and, coming, multiple times. Everyone remembers the last time he came, where he was assassinated, but he came in February, he came in March, and he was really committed to helping these sanitation workers. And eventually, they did get their benefits from that. But and then Chicago. And I think with those cities, it was important to point out the similarities. Whereas in Chicago, he went there and it was completely different, because it wasn't, like the South in terms of just the brute drawback that you get. But it was different because in the South, you had more Black support than you did when he went to Chicago. You got to think about it. You had more Black business owners and things like that felt like he was trying to mess up their flow. So you got Black clergymen, Black councilmen that are not on board with Dr. King's plan. And, in the South, he didn't have that type. So it was different. But in a way, it was the same. Is just the political drawback he faced, the national the national media's look on some of the things that he did. So in that story, I just wanted to point that out. And Chicago and Memphis, like I said, they're two cities. They're different, but they are similar in the way that Dr. King felt that both of these cities were cities that he needed to go to really focus in on the plans, the nonviolence plans he had, the equality plans that he had for his people and things like that.
And that's great insight. And that segues to number one. Go read DaMichael's story, please. It's an excellent story. You get an example of why his work is so good because of the opinion right there. It's not just a great opinion. It's backed up by great evidence and detail. So that was a wonderful answer, DaMichael. And now I ask you this, obviously, because this isn't the last time we're going to have you on the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Where could, first off, you can follow DaMichael at DaMichael C on Twitter. Obviously, you can search his name as it is right there. Beat writer for the Grizzlies for the Commercial Appeal. I'm sure plenty of folks already know that. But DaMichael, what can folks be looking forward to from you coming up over the next, towards the end of January as the Grizzlies play a tough schedule, but also leading up to the trade deadline and the All-Star break this week? Also, the finals for the All-Star voting happen as well. John Morant's future as an All-Star starter, hopefully. What all things do you have in the prepared for us coming up over the next few weeks, Michael?
Man, well, the number one thing that I want to do is I want fans to really get to know the players through me. And so you're going to get a lot more of those stories. I have a couple things in the works now that'll probably come out in the next couple weeks just on this team and just inside stuff on how they're playing together. And we talked about earlier, they're not an egotistic team. So we're going to go more in depth onto why they're not egotistic, how certain players are helping others and things like that. You're going to get a lot of that. We're going to do some fun stuff as well. It's no secret to a lot of people that I'm a sneakerhead. I have a couple things that I'm working on with that. We're going to do some fun stuff, with the players. I want the fans to get to know the players, through me, more than just, how many three-pointers is Desmond Bane making or John Morant's highlight dunks. I feel like at the end of this season, it's when we get to the playoff run, people can really, they'll be really tuned in to these players. We're gonna do a lot of that, but we're gonna do a lot of the stuff that everyone wants to read too. We're gonna dive into why the Grizzlies have been so good. We're gonna dive into the areas where they can improve. It's important for a writer like myself. Even when everything's going good, you have to still be critical because that's what coaches do, right? Coaches aren't just saying, oh, we're at the top of the world. We won 11 in a row. We're going to be champions. Coaches are going into that film and they're saying, oh, Desmond Bane, you didn't get Devin Booker on that shot, or they're saying, Jaren Jackson, you didn't set a hard enough screen right there. He blew through you on the screen and Ja didn't have room, to get to the rim. They're really going to point out those little small details even when they're winning. So I'm going to do some of that. Some people may not like those type of stories, but those are the stories you're going to need to hear because when those problems come up in a loss, you're just going to refer back to that story. So, yeah, Shawn, we're going to have some fun. But those are some of the plans that I have.
And I keep saying it, the thing that I'm so looking forward to with hopefully the Grizzlies remaining good and continuing to ascend the NBA ranks for a long time coming. The Memphis media, the folks that cover the team, so many great talents, so many great energies, so many great voices, and we're so thrilled and excited. And to be honest with you, we're all lucky to have you on board and looking forward to your great work. So listen to this show, Locked On Grizzlies. Go read DaMichael's stories. Follow him also for the links to his stories at DaMichael C on Twitter, myself at StatsSAC, the show at Locked On Grizz, and make sure you check out YouTube, subscribe there, and on the podcast platform as well. For DaMichael Cole, DaMichael, thank you so much for joining us today. If you'll stick with us for just a second, but thank you for joining us here for the podcast, sir.
Thank you for having me, Shawn. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And this will not be the last time that we have DaMichael. Obviously, looking forward to his insight as the rest of the season goes along. For DaMichael Cole, my name's Shawn Coleman. Thank you so much for joining us. Enjoy the MLK Day game. Go Grizzlies, and we'll talk to you again soon here on the Locked On Grizzlies podcast.